The first week of Formula One pre-season testing has been completed, and the teams are already protesting against each other thanks to development in the off-season. Welcome back to the Formula One Grid Talk podcast, where today we'll be discussing all of the action from the first half of testing in Spain. We are powered by the F1 Chronicle. Visit f1chronicle.com for news, reviews, and opinions on all things F1. Hosting today will be me, George Howson. Joining me today are sports journalist Louis Edwards.
Hello.
Motorsport journalist Phillip Horton.
Hello.
And engineering student Owain Medford.
Hello.
Hi there, lads. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thanks for coming on as well. We've got two people who are actually at pre-season testing in this podcast today, Louis and Phillip there. Phillip is still out there, I believe, as well. So yes, let's just get into it, really. I mean, I think the biggest talking point, really, Louis, is with our champions, Mercedes-Benz, and their quite ingenious DAS system, the steering system, or is it suspension system?
Well, we'll have to see what the FIA think about that. They probably will promptly ban it, knowing them. But at the moment, it is a very, very clever system. I don't know the 100% ins and outs, but from what I've seen and what I've heard from and what I've read about the system, it seems incredibly ingenious. And, it's amazing to see that Mercedes, even though they are the benchmark, they constantly push that benchmark and never sort of just stay where they are and get complacent. They're always pushing to make sure that their car is the best of the best.
Yeah, and they've certainly really pushed the envelope with this one at Owain. But have they pushed it too far? Have they? Is DAS good? Is it all right? Is it legal?
I think it's legal. If the way that I would do it, I don't know that much, but the way that I read in the regulations in all the coverage that sent all the teams into a spin this week, the way that I would do it, I think is legal. It comes, like you said earlier, it comes down to whether you judge it as a suspension alteration system or a steering alteration system, and then that's probably where the legality or illegality, as it may be, is going to lie.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's in a way it's quite simple, but it's also very ingenious in what they've done. You know, nobody else has thought of it. Now, Phillip, you've been in the paddock, I imagine. I know you've been down there doing your journalism things, but what's been the reaction to it? Have people been just like, wow, this is amazing, or just like, how the hell have they got away with this? What's been the kind of feeling about it all?
Well, I think the first day of testing on Wednesday, it was a bit underwhelming because nothing really happened. No one had a disaster. No one really stood out. And then we turned up on Thursday, and then suddenly there's this TV footage of Mercedes steering wheel moving backwards and forwards. And immediately there's the thinking of, well, what have they done? Is that legal? And what are the effects of it? In terms of the legality, the reaction usually when something appears, someone's found something very clever in the regulation, a loophole or something. But in this case, it doesn't even seem to be a loophole. It's just they found something. No one else ever developed it or thought it was worth developing. And every other team and drivers either kind of gone, we're focusing on ourselves, or, well, actually, that's quite a good design. No one's actually come out and said, that's ridiculous, that's legal, and that should be banned.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how it develops. I believe they've banned it for 2021. It's not going to be around next season. But as far as you can tell so far, this season it's going to stay on the car. Now, the advantages of it are various. One of them being that they get greater straight line speed. Because basically, they change, like, if you imagine the wheels like this for people who are watching, like on your road car will be like this with your wheels. They're perfectly up. But Formula One cars have them turned in, I believe. Or is it turned out? One of the two.
Turned out.
There we go. But that's to help with the cornering. But obviously, in a straight line, you ideally want them like that. So they basically changed that while they're on the straights. It's a very, very simple, but at the same time, in the way they've done it, it's really, really clever, and it could have some massive advantages for them. They've already got very good engine, they've already got very good aerodynamics, but that's a huge advantage, and it's something that we may well see teams trying to copy. We'll see how that evolves. But regardless, at the moment, I've just looked at the fastest times overall in testing so far. Bottas is 1:15.7 is 1.3 seconds faster than anybody else. And I know you can't read too much into testing times, Louis, but that is sizable. That's a big advantage.
It was a huge and absolute mega lap. And I think it was very close to the track record around Barcelona. It's certainly by far the fastest time that we saw after last year's testing. I think that was just Mercedes going, yeah, this is what we can do, but I don't think that's everything that we've seen from the Mercedes. But the thing is, you also then have to take it with a pinch of salt because he was using softer tyres than what is allowed during the race weekend. So, but it's still very impressive. And we'll see what happens in the second week to see if any other teams try and go as fast as Bottas did.
Yeah, that's the thing. You don't know what the engine modes are. You don't know what the fuel loads are. There's so many different variables. But the fact is they're clear 1-2 at the moment. And with how they've gone in the V6 era so far, you can kind of see where this is going already, potentially. Now, the team that normally have the fastest times in testing, especially pre-season testing, are Ferrari. But it seems like this year, they're just getting their heads down and getting on with it. I mean, it's a different approach, but it could be an approach that really works for them.
Yeah, in the preseason, obviously, like before testing, we've been hearing quite a lot of noise from the Ferrari camp, but it's not really been sort of bigging themselves up, I guess is the best way to put it. It almost seems like they've taken a page out of the Mercedes book in saying, we're not going to be very good, we're not going to be very good, and it kind of just looks like they've run the engine modes very low and just used high fuel loads in testing and just pounded around and got as many laps as they can.
Yeah, it's the key at the end of the day, getting the laps in. But if I recall correctly, there's been some mechanical issues for Ferrari, Phil. I think Sebastian Vettel stopped out on track on the first or second day, so it's not all plain sailing for the red car so far.
No, it's been very subdued. It's almost, if you were watching, you'd almost be convinced they weren't there last year. They only set the 8th best time, didn't do a huge amount of laps. Vettel was unwell. Then when he got in the car, there was an engine issue that had to be checked back at Maranello, so they had to change the power unit. They are playing it down. I think they learned from last year when they thought they had a very quick car and got pretty burnt when they turned up in Melbourne, having been overhauled a lot by Mercedes. The drivers have been positive. This is one element. Vettel is adamant there's more downforce compared to last year's car. Whether they've got the trade-off between downforce and drag right remains to be seen, especially having not turned up the power unit yet. And Charles Leclerc was encouraged by the greater setup flexibility of this year's car, which is something they struggled with last year in terms of a narrower operating window. We've only had 3 days so far. I mean, Ferrari are behind. The question is how far behind.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it does seem like they are behind, like you say. But I mean, do you feel like the drivers are being genuine when they say that, Philip? That this is an improvement on last year's car?
I'll use a classic testing phrase of "it's difficult to say."
He's on the fence.
You also have to remember, in terms of media availability, we only got to speak to Leclerc or hear from him after the first day, and hear from Vettel after the second day. So all these quotes, they all come at strange times. How developed the car is, or what's been going on track. I really don't know. I think the difference this year is there's nothing that stood out from Ferrari. Last year they stood out. This year they didn't. Whether that's because they've changed their approach to testing, or whether that's because they haven't. So I'm not sure yet. I think anyone that comes out and says, "Oh yeah, Ferrari clearly in huge trouble," or "Oh, Ferrari this far off," no one really knows. I think it'll only be after next week that we'll get a clearer picture when they start ramping up the performance.
And even then, it might potentially be difficult to tell because you can't tell with testing fully. It's so many different variables. But Melbourne will find out. That'll be the telling time. Now, the last of the top 3 teams from last season, Red Bull, Louis, and it's aside from Max Verstappen's spins, it's just been a bit, just getting on with it, really, getting the heads down. Not really spectacular lap times, but testing is about running the car consistently.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's good. I think what we're seeing from Red Bull is very positive. I think it's good that they're just getting a lot of miles on that engine, that just to make sure, that Honda have supplied them with a good and reliable engine this year, and just continuing that development that they have with them building from last year. Yeah, it did look a bit shaky from Verstappen in the first day, just maybe pushing the car a little too hard. But for the next 2 days, it was very, very good. I saw, quite good consistency from Albon as well. So it's looking like a car that both drivers seem to be able to work with well.
Yeah, it seems like it should be a solid car. And, like we were saying on the pre-testing preview, Owain, they got two drivers that last year did get on with the car a lot. This could be a big year for Red Bull. I mean, maybe not in terms of winning the championship. I think they're probably still some way off that, but probably potentially challenging Ferrari a bit more for the second place.
Yeah, I think they'll be confident in the fact that Ferrari seem to be having some issues or aren't going so well, and if they, they'll probably feel quite sort of, I guess, confident in that, that they've got a decent car that they can, Verstappen might be overdriving a little bit with a few spins, but it's cold. You haven't got that much track temperature and air temperature, and also, it could just be that they've not got the tyres right in the operating window, and we might see that change by the time that we get to sort of, was it round 5 when they go back there? So it might just be that he's just overdriving a little bit, but it might not be an issue once they're actually sort of out on track in the warmer conditions that you might see.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see. The second week is definitely a better indicator of all those sort of things when it comes to teams. Now, a team that didn't reveal their car until the actual testing started itself, Philip, was Renault. And I have to say, I'm quite surprised by how they've gone about this. The car, it looks very, very thin. They don't seem to have a lot of faith when it comes to the power unit they have in the back of it.
I think Renault last year, we know they had a very difficult year. They'd always been playing second fiddle to Red Bull in the chassis side. But then obviously McLaren joined 2018. Renault were comfortably ahead. That exposed McLaren's weaknesses. 2019 turns up and all of a sudden Renault come up with a chassis that's good but not great and isn't developed properly. So they've also taken, cosmetically anyway, from the front a different approach. How much of that's different in the back? Renault are in a funny place at the moment in that they've got to try and get back some positive momentum, but they know that 2020 isn't their year. Flip side is, if they have a bad 2020, A, do they get 2021? B, do they keep Daniel Ricciardo? I just think they're in a weird situation in that they have to improve how much do you throw at this year's car compared to next year's car.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's 2021 is going to be their big aim. This year they're not going to catch up. That's it. They're not going to catch up to be race winners. Probably won't even catch up to be podium takers. But at the same time, they've still got fans. They've still got expectations. So this year is going to be interesting for them. But so far, Louis, the times out on track have been, I'd say, pretty decent. I don't think they've had many reliability troubles either.
They only had the one on the final day with Ricciardo, but even before that, he just clocked in 78 laps after doing a race run. So, it's a bit of give and take. They didn't do too many laps first 2 days, and I felt they were lacking a bit. And then the final day, they come out, do like 150 laps, and you're like, oh, wow. But those lap times are encouraging if you're a Renault fan, and I think what they need to do next week is just continue getting those laps in, try and make sure that they get as much mileage just to catch up with how much McLaren have done and how much Racing Point have also done.
Yeah, McLaren are their big competition at the end of the day going into this season, Owen. I mean, it's looking like it'll be another big scrap between those two again this year. But, it's hard to tell so far. McLaren, a bit like Ferrari, not been pumping in too many fast laps, but they've just been getting on. Sainz and Norris have been going well over 100 laps each day.
Yeah, so McLaren have done a lot of laps, and I definitely don't think they've shown their true pace. They've only done they've done sort of 423 laps, which is only sort of 70 off Mercedes, and it's still quite a high amount. but they haven't actually pumped in that many lap times. If you look at like sort of the average lap times of Mercedes, if you look at the gap to Mercedes, essentially, they're sort of down there with Haas and Williams, and I really don't think that's the case. I think they're just keeping I think they're keeping their cards very close to their chest, and they're just running the car. I think they've probably got confidence in it to do that, but we might see that change later next week.
We'll have to see how this develops. Yeah, I mean, McLaren are probably the favourites for fourth, but we'll see. I mean, but there is a dark horse in all of this as well, and I use that phrase carefully because, end of the day, their car is coming under quite a bit of scrutiny. Philip, it's the Racing Point, and I don't know what your take is on all this, but everybody's been likening it to last year's Mercedes. I have to admit, the similarities are pretty obvious.
Yeah. When you put the two cars side by side, it's pretty obvious where they got their inspiration from. It's a logical development because you think when this team was bought by Lawrence Stroll in the summer break of 2018, they'd already got the 2019 plans locked away. They were behind on that because the money had run out. So last year they were kind of boxed into a corner, whereas for this year, they didn't quite have a blank sheet of paper in terms of unlimited funds, but it's the first year that team ever kind of had the green light to say, you know what, design what you want, do what you want, you've got the money. And what they did is they looked, right, we've had a Mercedes alliance using last year's gearbox for several years. How best can we make use of that? So following Red Bull's high rate philosophy was never going to work. So they've gone, right, how much can we copy from Mercedes within the regulations, and not just do that, but then make one thing looking at a design and saying, oh, we should do that, but then it's another getting it on track and making sure it all correlates and it uses the tyres correctly, that sort of thing. It definitely raised a few eyebrows. I think more so among people at Haas and Alfa Tauri that have faced criticism over, oh, you're just a clone of a Red Bull and a Ferrari. Is it right? I think that one's up for debate, but I'd rather have a competitive car that's inspired from a title-winning car than someone go completely their own way and mess it up.
Yeah, no, I see your point there. I really do. It's at the end of the day, the information's out there. All these teams, they've got thousands of images of everybody's car from last year. They've probably already got hundreds of images of every. They're just doing what they think's best. The Mercedes was the best car last year by far, and they just want to do the best they can. I do understand that, and Louis, you go back through the history of F1. Teams have always copied other teams. It's how it works. Someone comes up with a design, and either it gets banned or everybody else copies it. That's engineering.
Yeah, and in a sport that's constantly evolving, it is survival of the fittest, and therefore you want to follow what the strongest team is doing. So it does definitely make logical sense for the Racing Point to go along the sort of Mercedes imitating route, because they've got a Mercedes gearbox, Mercedes engine, therefore they make the most of Mercedes sort of aerodynamics and sort of design to try and make their car as competitive as possible. And now that they do have the funds, they can make that possible.
Yeah, definitely. And, going forward as well, Owain, Racing Point will become Aston Martin for 2021. So in a way, it's fair enough at the moment. I think when they become Aston Martin next year, it might be looked down upon a bit more because obviously, they're a big brand at the end of the day, and they won't want to be seen to be copying Mercedes. If you know where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah, I think some of the scrutiny and the sort of AlphaTauri and Haas complaints have come from the fact that obviously they look similar. Reading the rules, it is just a copy. According to Racing Point, if you ask them what they've done, they said basically we've taken a very sort of close look at Mercedes' last car because, like as Philip said, it fit. It doesn't make sense to go down this high rate philosophy with a car or with an engine and gearbox that are designed for a low rate philosophy, and particularly the gearbox, which sort of impacts the rear suspension, and that affects what ride height you can run that at. because Mercedes will have designed it around how they want it. And if you're buying a Mercedes gearbox, then you're going to get that Mercedes gearbox with the suspension mounts as they are. So to be honest, it makes sense to me that they've gone down this route. Like you say, it's going to get a bit more contentious once the Aston Martin brand name is put on the car, because that's obviously Aston Martin aren't going to want, or at least the board of Aston Martin, you think, wouldn't want being compared to a Mercedes too much. I think that'd hurt the brand. Obviously, motorsport is used as quite a big marketing tool, and it's not going to look good if your car is being splashed all over the sports headline saying basically, well, it's a Mercedes clone and it's got an Aston Martin badge on it. So I expect that to change, but it seems to be right now as the initial Racing Point thing or Force India thing as it was, doing what they can very efficiently with the money. And I think they'll transition out of that now that they've sort of got a bit more of a blank check.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you saying that. I mean, I think next year they won't be able to get over it, partly because obviously you've got a massive regulation change, next year. So this year's cars will not really be relevant for the following year. But yeah, I think this year they can get away with it, and I don't see a big problem with it, to be honest with you. Like you said, the Alfa Tauri now and Haas, they copy massively from Red Bull and Ferrari. So that's a big issue in it, to be honest with you. If there's anything like that comes up in F1, the other teams are always going to complain about it. It's just the way it is. Always trying to get an advantage over your competitors. You'd much rather that than just lay over and just let them do it. So it's fair enough. But yeah, so I mentioned AlphaTauri there, Philip. Striking new livery they got on that car, and I think it's fair to say very good mileage for them as well so far in testing. How's the kind of reaction been around them?
I think with their car, it's clearly an evolution of last year's car, and rightly so. There was nothing fundamentally wrong. As ever, they're a year behind Red Bull in effect. So it's the AlphaTauri AT01 has the rear end of last year's Red Bull Honda engine, and that frees up the designers both on other areas of the car because they've got limited resources compared to the big teams. Again, there's a handful of teams, AlphaTauri, Renault, Alfa Romeo, that last week they didn't seem to do anything spectacular, but they didn't do anything wrong. And you've got to remember last year, obviously they took the 2 podiums, but they almost beat Renault in the championship and nearly got the 5th place that Franz Tost so craves every single year. When he comes out pre-season and gets asked what he wants, it's always 5th place every single year without fail. Can they do it with this year's car? The early signs are good. They've got a good driver lineup, some much needed stability in that front with Danny Kvyat and Pierre Gasly. I see no reason why AlphaTauri won't be in that mix somewhere with. You'd think McLaren and Renault should be ahead, but even if they are where they were last year, that can be decent.
Yeah, sounds definitely good for AlphaTauri. And going from one Alfa to the other, Alfa Romeo. Now, aside from Kimi Räikkönen's breakdown, Louis, I think it's been very positive for them so far in testing. The speed's definitely there in the car.
Yeah, it can be top of the session at one point. It was a bit crazy, but they've done a absolute stonking amount of laps during this test. They've really sort of shone on track. They've got a lot of track time. I think they definitely dipped a bit last year. I think they weren't after, we saw what Charles and Marcus Ericsson could do in 2018. I think 2019 was a little disappointing from a standpoint of Alfa Romeo. But I think they want to just push on and get the most out of this test, just so they can really keep up with that midfield battle and not have such a shaky season as they did last year.
Yeah, it was a bit of a low. I think Räikkönen definitely dragged that car up as well last year, as Charles Leclerc did for the year before that as well. But how do you see Alfa Romeo kind of going this year, Owain? I mean, the signs are very, very good at the moment from testing so far, but it's such a competitive midfield, and they've got to keep the development race going, which arguably last year they definitely lost out to.
Yeah, they sort of seemed to flounder a little bit towards the end of last year. I think they're doing quite well this year, but there's obviously going to be a point where they're going to have to transition into 2021. So I don't know how much they can maintain that challenge. But the signs are good for now. Obviously, you can't read too much into the testing time, so I just won't, to be honest. But they did do a good amount of laps, sort of similar amount to McLaren, and that might be helpful when they come up against them, because you'd hope that they would be in the same sort of position as McLaren on the grid this year. Obviously not putting as many as the big boys, but they're still doing pretty good in comparison, I think.
Yeah, they are. It's definitely positive at the moment. Fingers crossed they get up the grid a bit more going into this year, because they were pretty far down there towards the end of last year and ended up, I think, 8th overall in the Constructors' Championship. So, yeah, definitely improvements there to be made, but it's so competitive, it's so tough. Now, a team that have definitely been having a tough time of it, Philip, recently, Haas. Now, I have to admit, when the car was revealed, when the design was revealed, I wasn't exactly blown away, and I'm not blown away now either. It's. I mean, you can't read too much into testing, but it doesn't look overly positive so far.
No, brutally honestly. If you're going to use statistics, you could say Haas slowest, and they completed the fewest laps. So that doesn't read a good start. They also had an accident with Romain Grosjean, although that was very, very minor. And another off with Kevin Magnussen when the wheel spacer broke, tyre let go, off he went into the wall. Again, only minor contact, but that was the afternoon session on Friday gone for them. So that's the time. And crucially, that accident occurred at the start of a race simulation, and that's what Haas are desperately looking for, is that correlation between the wind tunnel and the track, because that's what was costing them last year. They had the upgrade package in Spain that didn't work, and they persevered with it for way too long. Realised they should have listened to the driver, by which time last year, any hope of being higher than 9th in the championship. So again, it's one of those things, even if they did go well, they went well last year, they went well the year before, then in the races, they didn't go well. So again, it's too early to say, but it's definitely not been the best start for Haas, even if they haven't been focusing on times and have mainly been trying to focus on correlation.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, the thing you look for are fast laps and a lot of laps, and they've not done either really. But we'll see. We'll see how this evolves, Louis. But they had such a hard time of it in the races last year, and the fact that Magnussen and Grosjean have had these accidents as well, it's not exactly screaming confidence, is it?
No, I was expecting a lot more from Haas in this opening test days. I was hoping that they would, try and put all the woes from last year behind and just try and get out on track as much as possible, try and get the most out of this test so they can really develop that car better than they did last year. But it just wasn't to be. And they, as I said, fewest amount of laps, had a couple of offs as well. So it's just not exactly what you want.
Definitely not, no. And it could get worse for Haas in a way, Owain, because unbelievably, and I'm so glad to be saying this, things are looking up at Williams.
Yeah. Yeah, after the, horror.
They could have got much slower, admittedly, but...
I mean, after the horror story of last year's testing, they're the first out this year.
Yeah. Wasn't Russell waiting at the end of the pit lane, like before... Yeah. Before the clock started, he was just like, right, I'm getting every second of this. I missed too much last year.
Well, yeah, him and Sykes were down the end of the pit lane, and he was a bit quicker. I think Hines pulled. Sorry, not Hines. Sainz pulled over for a practice start.
Thanks, Brenson back this year.
Yeah.
Shock driving news.
Yeah, Sainz pulled over at the end of the pit lane. So the official first car out on track of this year's testing was a Williams, which is slightly poetic, but yeah, it's good. The gap, if you look at the lap times, the gap is still quite large to the front of the field, and they are, I think, the slowest. Well, I don't know. I guess it depends how you quantify it, but on average, I think that in some of the figures I've seen, they are the slowest. But to me, that doesn't really matter. The fact that they're actually out on track at all is going to be a big help, so they can get any correlation data and see how what they're doing in the wind tunnel is matching up. And obviously, with the shortened testing, you need to be out there running laps. So, that's very, very important. The cars are more reliable than ever. So we've had quite a long time with these engine regulations and things like that. But you still need to be out there running laps with your new car just to make sure you haven't designed a blunder. So it's good to see them out there doing laps, and that's I think that hopefully that's a big help.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they've been doing a lot of laps, like you said, and yeah, maybe they are the slowest team. Maybe I think they are probably still one of the slowest teams. I think they're down there with Haas without a doubt. But end of the day, it's massive progression on last year, Philip, because I think what did Russell do? Was it like 1.7 seconds faster than his qualifying time from last year? That's big progression.
Yeah, straight out of the box, the FW43 was faster than the FW42. George Russell and Nicholas Latifi both said, well, the lap times don't matter. The encouraging thing is the feeling. Last year's car was all over. It wasn't very stable, wasn't sturdy. This year, straight up. And that's a huge thing for a driver, to know that they can push from the outset and not think, oh, this thing's going to spit me off the road at any second. It is good for the team. You can't expect them to suddenly leap up the order after how far off they were last year, but they've basically righted the wrongs. They put in a huge amount of effort after last year's complete disaster when they hit rock bottom in restructuring the areas they needed to, understanding why they had the delays, enhancing the communication, and just talking to team members this week. There was a buoyancy about it. Not just the fact that they had a car ready, because everyone had a car ready. They're not back, but they're back on the right path.
Yeah, they're hopefully back being competitive and challenging for regular points, but we'll see how this goes. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Philip, is that there's not many. I think he's the only properly new driver this year. But Nicholas Latifi, a lot of people are expecting him to wipe the floor with, quite frankly, by George Russell. But have you had much contact with him? What do you make of him so far?
Yeah, I've known Nicholas for a few years, and he's I'm trying to think of the right word, because if you say intelligent, it makes it sound like other drivers aren't intelligent. I'd say studious. He's very methodical, very keen on the details, very hardworking. He has had a lot of F1 track time already. He was with Renault, he was with Force India, he's done Mercedes private test days, he was with Williams last year. He should pose more of a threat to George than Robert Kubica did. He is quite experienced for a rookie, compared to, say, some of the other guys that have come in. When you think of Alex Albon last year, had never even sat in an F1. I would be surprised if Russell didn't hold an advantage in the early races, just because his year of experience, the fact he has got those junior Formula titles under his belt, the fact he's been to a lot of the circuits. But it should be a lot closer than it was last year between Russell and Kubica, with Russell and Latifi.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. It should be closer. I do expect Russell to beat him, though, but possibly more on the virtue that Russell's had that year in the team already and that year in F1. It's a battle for him end of the day. So I think we'll just end the show on what you think are really what you think is going to happen next week. Do you see any big developments happen next year, Philip? Sorry, next week, Philip, in terms of like progression on, like, is there any rumblings about some big development coming to one of these cars, or it's just going to be just getting the laps in and seeing what these cars can really do?
I think there's always a chance someone could turn up with something. I know that's being extremely precise. Red Bull have done it in the past, where they've turned up with a fairly revolutionary car for the second test. Mercedes did it up. In terms of expectations, I think it will be, it sounds very boring, but short runs on the C5 tyres, which are obviously easier to pick out because they're the headline times. And then the more difficult thing is the long runs, because that's harder to keep track of. The fuel loads we don't know. It's a bit more of the same, just with more performance runs, really. A year with very few regulation changes, and everyone's trying to maximise track time without doing anything spectacular, because we've only got 3 test days before FP1 in Melbourne.
Yeah, it's been amazing the amount of laps these teams have been doing. It's been regularly been doing over 100 a day between the drivers that they've been doing. It's something else. The amount, when you put it into perspective, like the amount of laps to do a Grand Prix distance around Catalonia, it's 66. These teams are in some cases doing almost 3 times that in a day. It's insane to do that regularly.
I can remember the first day of testing in 2014. I can't remember who did the most laps. I want to say Ferrari, but I'm sure I'm sure there was something like 100 laps done in total on the first day. I think 2 already. One broke down at the end of the pit lane and didn't come out again. You know, it was a complete mess. And you're thinking, just 6 years later. I mean, I think every team did 100 laps first. And there was no red flags at all. All the cars ran faultlessly on the first day of testing. Yeah, that's how far the sport's come in just 6 years. And it's a testament to all of the teams involved, really.
Yeah, it's incredible the reliability they've got. But these things develop, these technologies coming into road cars now. So expect it to be like that with the way they do these. But yeah, so thank you for joining us, lads. Really do appreciate it as always.
No problem.
No worries.
No. Cool.
We are available on YouTube. We are available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Music. Most of our listeners do come from Apple Music as well. So thank you to the iPhone users. You're really popping up our numbers, which I absolutely love that. Just search for the One Grid Talk. You'll be able to find it on there. We're also on Omni Studio and Pocket Casts. We have a Reddit if you want to suggest things. If you don't like my beard being this long, well, you can tell me that, or you can tell us something else. Just search for New F1 Podcast, looking for feedback. And we also have a Patreon as well. If you want to get us to invest in some better lights, some better phones, then you can do that. Just search for Formula One Grid Talk on Patreon. Anything you can do will be very much appreciated. And yeah, so it's been eventful. It's been exciting. First week of testing, some big developments in the cars, some controversy. Let's do it all again next week. We'll be back in exactly 1 week's time for the reaction to the second week of testing. And yeah, so until then, see you later.